Chapter 1. The binding ritual was meant to be a celebration, a moment when Dakota Frost would gracefully accept her fate as Alpha Thorne Ashwood's bound servant and disappear into the background like every other oracle-marked wolf before her. But standing in the center of the grand celestial hall, surrounded by the most elite wolves of the Star Council, Dakota felt the prophecy bond burning through her veins like liquid fire. Every instinct told her to lower her eyes, to accept the chains they offered, to fade into the role of silent seer that her visions had condemned her to. Instead, she met Thorne's golden eyes directly. "I, Dakota Frost, accept your binding," she declared, her voice resonating with a power she didn't know she possessed, carrying across the crystal columns with unnatural clarity. "But I invoke the seer's paradox and bind you in return." The collective intake of breath was audible even over the humming of the ceremonial crystals. In 5 centuries of oracle tradition, no marked seer had ever spoken the words of reciprocal binding. Seers were tools, vessels, conduits for prophecy, not equals who could trap an alpha in their own ceremonial chains. But Dakota wasn't finished. 3 days earlier, the Frost Pack had been nothing more than a forgotten mountain territory, the kind of place where failed seers and vision-sick wolves eked out an existence far from the gleaming council cities. Dakota had grown up knowing exactly what she was: daughter of a mad prophet, granddaughter of frauds, bearer of visions so weak and sporadic that her eyes were pale blue instead of the deep violet that marked true oracle blood. At 23, she'd never had a vision last longer than 30 seconds, had never predicted anything more. Chapter 1. The binding ritual was meant to be a celebration, a moment when Dakota Frost would gracefully accept her fate as Alpha Thorne Ashwood's bound servant and disappear into the background like every other oracle-marked wolf before her. But standing in the center of the grand celestial hall, surrounded by the most elite wolves of the Star Council, Dakota felt the prophecy bond burning through her veins like liquid fire. Every instinct told her to lower her eyes, to accept the chains they offered, to fade into the role of silent seer that her visions had condemned her to. Instead, she met Thorne's golden eyes directly. "I, Dakota Frost, accept your binding," she declared, her voice resonating with a power she didn't know she possessed, carrying across the crystal columns with unnatural clarity. "But I invoke the seer's paradox and bind you in return." The collective intake of breath was audible even over the humming of the ceremonial crystals. In 5 centuries of oracle tradition, no marked seer had ever spoken the words of reciprocal binding. Seers were tools, vessels, conduits for prophecy, not equals who could trap an alpha in their own ceremonial chains. But Dakota wasn't finished. 3 days earlier, the Frost Pack had been nothing more than a forgotten mountain territory, the kind of place where failed seers and vision-sick wolves eked out an existence far from the gleaming council cities. Dakota had grown up knowing exactly what she was: daughter of a mad prophet, granddaughter of frauds, bearer of visions so weak and sporadic that her eyes were pale blue instead of the deep violet that marked true oracle blood. At 23, she'd never had a vision last longer than 30 seconds, had never predicted anything more significant than next week's weather, and had certainly never expected to catch the attention of the Star Council, which made the arrival of the council convoy utterly shocking. The next week's weather, and had certainly never expected to catch the attention of the Star Council, which made the arrival of the council convoy utterly shocking. "They are here for the crystal alignment," her guardian, Maven, had whispered as they watched the procession of white vehicles wind through their small settlement. "The High Seer herself is conducting the annual prophecy bond revelations." Dakota had watched from behind their frost-covered window as wolves in pristine silver uniforms emerged from vehicles that probably cost more than their entire pack's yearly resources. At the center of it all, radiating authority without effort, was Alpha Thorne Ashwood. Even from a distance, Dakota could feel something stirring in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with their mountain cold and everything to do with the impossible recognition that whispered through her soul. "Bound." The word echoed in her mind like a bell tolling. She'd laughed at the absurdity. Dakota Frost, unremarkable in every measurable way, prophesy-bound to the most powerful alpha in the Star Council. The fates must be playing some cosmic joke. But when Thorne's head had snapped toward her window across the settlement square, when those molten gold eyes had locked onto hers with an intensity that stole her breath, she'd known the bond was real. And from the way his expression had immediately shifted from recognition to revulsion, she'd known exactly what he thought about it. An error. She'd heard him mutter to his second-in-command that evening at the ceremonial feast. The fates must have made an error. Dakota had spent the next 3 days watching Thorne interact with her pack, seeing the barely concealed disgust in his eyes every time he was forced to acknowledge her existence. She'd watched him charm the other unmarked seers, wolves with prestigious bloodlines and powerful visions who would make suitable bonds for an alpha of his standing. She'd also watched the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. The hunger in his gaze when the prophecy bond flared between them. The way his hands would clench into fists when she was near, as if fighting the urge to reach for her. The bond was real. The attraction was undeniable. But his pride was stronger than both. Which brought them to tonight, the formal crystal alignment where all prophecy bonds discovered during the High Seer's visit would be officially recognized or formally severed. Dakota had known what was coming. She'd seen it in Thorne's cold, professional demeanor all day. She'd felt it in the way he'd avoided her eyes directly, the way he'd positioned himself as far from her as possible during the pre-ceremony rituals. She'd come to the celestial hall prepared to accept his binding gracefully, to bow her head and fade away like a good little nobody should. But as she'd stood there watching Thorne announce his intention to bind her as a servant rather than an equal in front of hundreds of witnesses, watching the smirks on the faces of the elite wolves who'd always known she didn't belong, something inside her had shattered. Not her heart, that had been breaking steadily for days. Her fear. For the first time in her life, Dakota Frost had stopped caring what people thought of her. And apparently, when you stopped caring about fitting in, you discovered you had far more power than anyone had given you credit for. Back in the celestial hall, the silence that followed Dakota's counterbinding stretched like a blade against skin. High Seer Celeste herself sat frozen on her throne, her ancient violet eyes wide with something that might have been shock or respect. The assembled elite looked between Dakota and Thorne as if watching a chess match where the pieces had suddenly caught fire. Thorne's face had gone completely blank, the kind of dangerous calm that preceded either complete surrender or total destruction. "You," he started, his voice barely above a whisper. "You can't bind me back. That's not how this works." Dakota felt something wild and reckless unfurling in her chest. Maybe it was the prophecy bond finally snapping. Or maybe it was 23 years of being invisible finally reaching a breaking point. Either way, she found herself smiling. "Actually," she said, turning toward the ancient prophecy scrolls displayed on pedestals near the High Seer's throne, "according to the original Fates doctrine, any prophecy bond acknowledged by both parties can be invoked by either party. The fact that most marked seers choose not to invoke reciprocal binding doesn't mean they can't." A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd. Dakota could see several of the council scholars frantically consulting their own copies of the doctrine, their expressions growing more astonished by the second. She's correct," stammered the head scholar, a thin wolf named Silas who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "The reciprocal binding clause exists. It's just never been invoked because no one has ever been foolish enough to try," Thorne finished, his voice deadly quiet. But something had shifted in the hall's energy. What had started as a humiliating public binding was now something else entirely, a legal challenge that even the High Seer couldn't ignore. "Fascinating," High Seer Celeste said slowly, leaning forward in her throne. Her voice carried the weight of centuries, and when she spoke, everyone listened. "In 500 years of service, I have never witnessed a reciprocal binding. Tell me, young Frost, do you understand what you've just done?" Dakota's newfound courage flickered slightly under the High Seer's intense stare, but she forced herself to stand straighter. "I've invoked my right to bind the wolf who tried to bind me, Your Grace. Nothing more, nothing less. Nothing more." Thorne stepped closer, and Dakota could feel the fury radiating off him in waves. "You've just challenged the natural order. Alphas don't get bound by wolves like me." Dakota finished for him, her voice steady despite the trembling in her knees. "You're right. Alphas don't usually get bound by anyone because most wolves are too afraid to use their own fate-given rights. But I'm not most wolves." The lie came so smoothly she almost believed it herself. The truth was she was terrified. Her heart was hammering so hard she was sure everyone in the hall could hear it. But she was also angry, angrier than she'd ever been in her life. And anger, she was discovering, was far more useful than fear. Chapter 2. 4 days earlier, the Frost Pack had been nothing more than a forgotten mountain territory, the kind of place where failed seers and vision-sick wolves eked out an existence far from the gleaming council cities. Dakota had grown up knowing exactly what she was: daughter of a mad prophet, granddaughter of frauds, bearer of visions so weak and sporadic that her eyes were pale blue instead of the deep violet that marked true oracle blood. At 23, she'd never had a vision last longer than 30 seconds, had never predicted anything more significant than next week's weather, and had certainly never expected to catch the attention of the Star Council, which made the arrival of the Council convoy utterly shocking. "They are here for the crystal alignment," her guardian, Maven, had whispered as they watched the procession of white vehicles wind through their small settlement. "The High Seer herself is conducting the annual prophecy bond revelations." Dakota had watched from behind their frost-covered window as wolves in pristine silver uniforms emerged from vehicles that probably cost more than their entire pack's yearly resources. At the center of it all, radiating authority without effort, was Alpha Thorne Ashwood. Even from a distance, Dakota could feel something stirring in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with their mountain cold and everything to do with the impossible recognition that whispered through her soul. Bound, the word echoed in her mind. She'd laughed at the absurdity. Dakota Frost, unremarkable in every measurable way, prophesy-bound to the most powerful alpha in the Star Council. The fates must be playing some cosmic joke. But when Thorne's head had snapped toward her window across the settlement square, when those molten gold eyes had locked onto hers with an intensity that stole her breath, she'd known the bond was real. And from the way his expression had immediately shifted from recognition to revulsion, she'd known exactly what he thought about it. An error. She'd heard him mutter to his second-in-command that evening at the ceremonial feast. The fates must have made an error. Dakota had spent the next 3 days watching Thorne interact with her pack, seeing the barely concealed disgust in his eyes every time he was forced to acknowledge her existence. She'd watched him charm the other unmarked seers, wolves with prestigious bloodlines and powerful visions who would make suitable bonds for an alpha of his standing. She'd also watched the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. The hunger in his gaze when the prophecy bond flared between them. The way his hands would clench into fists when she was near, as if fighting the urge to reach for her. The bond was real. The attraction was undeniable. But his pride was stronger than both. Which brought them to tonight, the formal crystal alignment where all prophecy bonds discovered during the High Seer's visit would be officially recognized or formally severed. Dakota had known what was coming. She'd seen it in Thorne's cold, professional demeanor all day. She'd felt it in the way he'd avoided her eyes directly, the way he'd positioned himself as far from her as possible during the pre-ceremony rituals. She'd come to the celestial hall prepared to accept his binding gracefully, to bow her head and fade away like a good little nobody should. But as she'd stood there watching Thorne announce his intention to bind her as a servant rather than an equal in front of hundreds of witnesses, watching the smirks on the faces of the elite wolves who'd always known she didn't belong, something inside her had shattered. Not her heart, that had been breaking steadily for days. Her fear. For the first time in her life, Dakota Frost had stopped caring what people thought of her. And apparently, when you stopped caring about fitting in, you discovered you had far more power than anyone had given you credit for. Present moment, the Celestial Hall. "This is unprecedented," High Seer Celeste mused, and for the first time since entering the hall, she looked genuinely entertained. "Silas, what does the doctrine say about reciprocal bindings?" The head scholar cleared his throat nervously. "According to the ancient texts, Your Grace, when both parties formally invoke the prophecy bond, it creates what's called an equilibrium bond status. Both wolves are considered legally equal partners with shared access to prophetic power and no hierarchical obligation." Interesting. The High Seer's eyes gleamed with something that made Dakota's instincts prickle with warning. "And what about recompense?" "Recompense?" Dakota and Thorne spoke in unison. "Oh yes," High Seer Celeste smiled, showing teeth that were still perfectly sharp despite her advanced age. "The equilibrium bond status requires recompense to be paid by the party who initiated the binding sequence." Since Alpha Ashwood spoke first, she let the implication hang in the air. The color drained from Thorne's face. "Your Grace, surely you can't be serious. The Ashwood pack assets are considerable." "Yes," the High Seer's smile widened, "which makes this all the more intriguing. Tell me, Miss Frost, are you familiar with the traditional recompense for an equilibrium bond?" Dakota's mouth went dry. She'd been running on pure adrenaline and righteous anger, but she hadn't thought beyond the moment of binding Thorne back. The idea that there might be legal consequences that benefited her, hadn't even occurred to her. "I'm not familiar with the specifics, Your Grace." "The bound party is entitled to claim equivalent status recompense." Silas read from his scroll, his voice growing stronger as he found his footing in familiar legal territory. "Meaning if an alpha attempts to bind a seer as a servant and that seer reciprocally invokes an equal bond, The Seer gains the right to claim alpha status and territory equivalent to what they would have been denied through the servant binding. The celestial hall erupted in shocked whispers. Dakota felt her knees go weak as the full implications hit her. "You mean?" she started. "I mean," High Seer Celeste said, her ancient eyes twinkling with mischief, "that you, Dakota Frost, have just legally claimed the right to your own alpha territory. Congratulations, my dear. You've just gone from bound servant to pack leader in the span of a single conversation." The look of absolute horror on Thorne's face was almost worth the heart attack she was currently having. Chapter 3. The celebration in Dakota's heart lasted exactly 12 seconds. That's how long it took for Thorne to recover from his shock and remember that he was an alpha who had never lost a political battle in his entire life. "Your Grace," Thorne said, his voice smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. "While I appreciate the educational value of this legal exercise, I think we're overlooking something critical." High Seer Celeste raised an eyebrow. "Oh, the reciprocal binding law requires that both parties hold legitimate pact standing when the bond is acknowledged." Thorne's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "Miss Frost may have been born into the Frost Pack, but she's not actually a member anymore." Dakota's blood turned to ice. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Thorne continued, pulling a document from his jacket with theatrical flourish, "that 2 hours ago, your pack leader, Maven Frost, formally expelled you from the pack for visions deemed fraudulent and detrimental to pack safety." The paper rustled as he unfolded it, and Dakota could see Maven's signature at the bottom, even from across the hall. Her guardian's signature. The woman who had raised her, authorizing her exile. "The expulsion was filed with the council registry this afternoon," Thorne went on, his voice growing stronger as he sensed victory. "Which means that when you attempted to bind me back, you were no longer a pack member. You were a rogue wolf. And rogue wolves have no legal standing to invoke reciprocal binding rights." The celestial hall spun around Dakota as the full scope of the trap became clear. This hadn't been a spontaneous humiliation. This had been planned, orchestrated down to the smallest detail. Maven, the woman who had found her as a 6-year-old orphan, who had called her daughter for 17 years, had sold her out for political favor with the most powerful alpha in the Star Council. "Maven," Dakota whispered, her voice barely audible over the renewed murmuring of the crowd. She could see her guardian now, standing near the back of the hall with tears streaming down her face. But she didn't deny it, didn't speak up to defend Dakota or claim the document was forged. She just stood there crying silent tears that felt like knives in Dakota's chest. "The expulsion is properly documented," Silas confirmed after examining the papers, his voice heavy with something that might have been sympathy. "Filed at 4:23 p.m. today with 2 witness signatures and the official pack seal." "Which means," Thorne said triumphantly, "that Miss Frost's attempted binding holds no legal weight. She spoke as a rogue, and rogues cannot invoke prophecy bond law. The original servant binding stands, with no recompense required." High Seer Celeste studied the document for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Dakota held her breath, hoping against hope that the ancient seer might find some loophole, some technicality that could save her from this public destruction. Instead, she nodded slowly. "The law is clear. Without pact standing, there can be no reciprocal binding." Her eyes found Dakota across the hall. "I'm sorry, child. You played the game well, but you were outmaneuvered before it began." The defeat was crushing, but it was the betrayal that truly destroyed her. Dakota looked again at Maven, the woman who had taught her to read, who had held her through fever dreams and violent visions, who had promised she was worthy of love despite her weak sight. The woman who had thrown her to the wolves, literally, for a chance to curry favor with Alpha Thorne. "Why?" Dakota asked, her voice breaking on the single word. Maven finally spoke, her words barely a whisper but carrying clearly in the silent hall. "He promised to protect the pack," she said. If I helped him avoid the political complications of binding his prophesied match as an equal, he would ensure our territory remained secure. Our people would be safe." "Our people," Dakota repeated hollowly. "But not me." "You were never really one of us," Maven said, and each word was a separate blade. "Your visions, your weakness, we all knew you'd never truly belong. This way, at least your sacrifice means something. At least the pack survives." The cruel mathematics of it was breathtaking. Trade one worthless pack member for the protection of dozens of others. From a purely practical standpoint, it was the smart play. From a human standpoint, it was the kind of betrayal that shattered souls. Dakota felt something inside her chest crack and fall away. Not her heart, which had already been broken by Thorne's initial binding attempt, but something deeper. The part of her that had always believed that if she just tried hard enough, was good enough, quiet enough, she might eventually earn her place in the world. That part died right there on the crystal floor of the Celestial Hall in front of hundreds of witnesses who were now looking at her with a mixture of pity and second-hand embarrassment. "Well then," she said, her voice surprisingly steady for someone whose entire world had just collapsed. "I suppose that settles it." She turned to face Thorne, who was watching her with something that might have been satisfaction or might have been regret. It was hard to tell, and Dakota found she no longer cared. "Congratulations, Alpha," she said with a small bow. "You won. I hope it was worth the effort." She started toward the hall doors, planning to walk out with whatever dignity she could salvage, maybe find a cliff somewhere and contemplate whether jumping off it would be more or less painful than living with this level of humiliation. But High Seer Celeste's voice stopped her before she'd taken 3 steps. "Miss Frost," the ancient monarch called, her voice carrying an odd note of anticipation. "Before you go, there's something else you should know." Dakota turned back, too emotionally exhausted to feel hope or fear. The High Seer smiled, and this time there was something predatory in the expression. "You may not be able to invoke reciprocal binding rights as a rogue, but there is one other legal avenue available to you. Your Grace." Silas looked confused. "The right of vision challenge," High Seer Celeste said simply. "Any wolf who has been wronged by an alpha may invoke the ancient right to challenge them through prophetic trial. Win, and you gain everything they would have lost to reciprocal binding recompense. Lose." She shrugged eloquently. "Lose and you go mad," Thorne finished, his voice tight with something that might have been worry. "Prophetic trials burn out weak seers. She'd be vision-sick for life, if she survived at all." "Precisely," the High Seer's eyes gleamed. "Tell me, Miss Frost, are you familiar with the right of vision challenge?" Dakota's mouth was too dry to speak, so she just shook her head. "It's quite simple, really," High Seer Celeste continued conversationally. "Shared vision trial. Both parties enter the veil together. No mental shields, no resistance, no mercy. The challenged party chooses the depth and duration of the trial, but it must take place within 7 days of the challenge being issued. Winner takes all." She leaned forward in her throne, and for the first time all evening, she looked genuinely interested in the outcome. "The question is, do you have the courage to issue such a challenge, or will you walk away and live with the knowledge that you let them destroy you without a fight?" The Celestial Hall held its breath. Even Maven had stopped crying, watching Dakota with wide, horrified eyes. Thorne, for his part, looked like a man watching a mouse decide whether to attack a cat, confident in the outcome, but surprised by the potential audacity. Dakota looked around the hall at all the faces watching her. Elite wolves who had never known hunger or rejection. Powerful alphas who had been born into their strength. Council officials who served at the pleasure of the High Seer and never had to wonder if they'd have a home tomorrow. None of them understood what it was like to have nothing left to lose. But Dakota was about to show them. Chapter 4. I, Dakota Frost, invoke the right of vision challenge against Alpha Thorne Ashwood. The words left her mouth before her rational mind could stop them. They hung in the air like a death sentence, which realistically they probably were. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Half the Celestial Hall gasped in shock, while the other half burst into excited whispers. Someone in the back actually started laughing, a high, disbelieving sound that cut through the chaos like a blade. Thorne stared at her as if she'd just sprouted a second head. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious," Dakota replied, surprised by how calm she sounded. Inside, her instincts were pacing frantically, whining about the insanity of challenging an alpha who could probably shatter her mind with a single deep vision. But the human part of her, the part that was tired of being small and scared and forgettable, felt oddly peaceful. "This is madness," Maven whispered from her spot near the back wall. "Dakota, please. Just walk away. You've made your point." "Have I?" Dakota turned to face her former pack leader, her former mother, her former everything. "What point would that be, Maven? That I'm exactly as weak and worthless as everyone always believed? That you were right to trade me away like damaged livestock? That's not what That's exactly what you meant." Dakota's voice carried a strength she didn't know she possessed. "You meant that I was expendable. That my life, my happiness, my future, none of it mattered as much as your political convenience." She turned back to High Seer Celeste, who was watching the proceedings with the delighted expression of someone enjoying an unexpectedly entertaining show. "Your Grace, I formally request that you witness my challenge." "Witnessed and accepted," the High Seer replied immediately, clearly having the time of her ancient life. "Alpha Ashwood, you are legally bound to respond. Will you accept the challenge?" Thorne looked around the hall as if hoping someone would explain how his perfectly orchestrated evening had gone so completely sideways. His second-in-command, a broad-shouldered wolf named Garrett, was making frantic abort-mission gestures from the sidelines. "She's a rogue with no pack training," Thorne said finally. "She's never even had a full vision. This isn't a challenge. It's assisted suicide." "Nevertheless," High Seer Celeste said cheerfully, "the law is the law. You must either accept the challenge or formally acknowledge her as your superior and grant her the recompense she originally claimed." The silence that followed was deafening. Dakota could practically see the wheels turning in Thorne's head as he weighed his options. Accept the challenge and risk looking like a bully who destroys helpless rogue seers for sport, or back down and lose face in front of the entire supernatural political establishment. "Fine," he said eventually, his voice tight with controlled fury. "I accept. But I choose the terms of the trial." "Of course you do," Dakota muttered. 7 days from tonight, at the Veil Sanctum. Full vision immersion, no mental barriers. Trial continues until submission or... He paused, giving her one last chance to back down. "Or until madness." "Agreed." The word came out steadier than Dakota felt. "Then it's settled," High Seer Celeste announced, clapping her hands together with evident satisfaction. "Let the record show that Dakota Frost has invoked the right of vision challenge against Alpha Thorne Ashwood, with the trial to take place in 7 days' time. Until then, both parties are under council protection and may not be harmed or interfered with by any other party." She stood from her throne, a clear signal that the evening's entertainment had concluded. "Court is dismissed. I do so look forward to next week's festivities." As the assembled elite began filing out of the celestial hall, chattering excitedly about the unprecedented drama they'd just witnessed, Dakota found herself standing alone in the center of the crystal floor, alone and beginning to realize the full scope of what she'd just committed herself to. 7 days to prepare for a vision trial against one of the most powerful alphas in the council. 7 days to somehow become strong enough to survive mental combat with a wolf who had been training in prophetic arts since childhood. 7 days to figure out how to avoid going mad in front of hundreds of spectators. 7 days to live. "Dakota." Maven's voice was small and broken as she approached. "What have you done?" "What I should have done years ago," Dakota replied without turning around. "I stopped letting other people decide what I'm worth. He's going to destroy your mind. You'll be vision sick for the rest of your life, if you survive at all." "Probably." Dakota finally faced the woman who had raised her. "But at least I'll lose as myself, instead of living as whatever convenient fiction you and Thorne needed me to be." Maven's face crumpled. "I never wanted this. I thought if you just accepted the binding quietly, you could start over somewhere else. Find a small pack that would take you in. Maybe find peace with someone more suitable." "More suitable?" Dakota laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You mean weaker? Someone who wouldn't make me dream above my station." "I meant someone who could care for you without destroying you," Maven whispered. For a moment, Dakota's anger wavered. She could see the genuine pain in Maven's eyes, the regret that came too late to change anything. Part of her, the part that had been a daughter for 17 years, wanted to forgive, to understand, to find some way to salvage something from the wreckage of their relationship. But then she remembered standing in the same hall 20 minutes ago, hearing Maven confirm her expulsion without even trying to defend her. Remembered the careful planning that had gone into ensuring Dakota's humiliation was as complete as possible. "If you had loved me," Dakota said quietly, "you would never have signed that expulsion order. Love doesn't come with political calculations, Maven. What you felt for me was convenient affection at best." She turned and walked toward the hall doors, where a small group of council guards was waiting to escort her to whatever accommodations had been prepared for condemned challengers. "Dakota, wait." Maven's voice was desperate now. "Where will you go? How will you prepare? You can't face him alone." Dakota paused at the threshold, her hand on the massive crystal door. "I've been alone my whole life," she said without looking back. "I just finally stopped pretending otherwise." The doors closed behind her with a sound like thunder, cutting off Maven's reply and sealing Dakota's fate. The council guard captain, A grizzled wolf named Commander Frost, no relation, thankfully, was waiting in the corridor with an expression that mixed professional courtesy with genuine sympathy. "Miss Frost," he said formally, "Her Grace has arranged quarters for you in the Tower of Contemplation. You'll have access to vision chambers and a modest library. Is there anything specific you require for your preparation?" Dakota almost laughed at the careful euphemism. Preparation, as if 7 days of training could somehow level the playing field between her and an alpha who had been bred for prophetic dominance. "Actually," she said, surprising herself, "there is something. I need to know everything you have about Alpha Ashwood's vision style, his weaknesses, his preferred depths, anything that might give me even the smallest advantage." Commander Frost raised an eyebrow. "Planning to fight dirty?" "Planning to survive," Dakota corrected. "And if that requires fighting dirty, then I'll become the dirtiest fighter you've ever seen." The commander's weathered face split into the first genuine smile she'd seen all evening. "Now that," he said, "sounds like the attitude of a wolf who might actually make this interesting." They walked through the winding corridors of the council complex, passing groups of elite wolves who whispered and pointed as Dakota went by. Some looked at her with pity, others with amusement, a few with something that might have been respect. The Tower of Contemplation was exactly as depressing as it sounded. Built into the eastern wall of the council stronghold, it was traditionally used to house seers who had committed crimes serious enough to warrant confinement, but whose bloodlines were too valuable to simply execute outright. The circular stone room had one window, one bed, one desk, and the kind of oppressive silence that made you acutely aware of your own mortality. Dakota had been staring at the ceiling for 3 hours when the knock came. "Enter," she called, assuming it was a servant bringing her evening meal or another stack of vision manuals that wouldn't do her any good against an alpha who could probably snap her consciousness like a twig. Instead, Commander Frost stepped into the room, followed by a figure that made Dakota's breath catch in her throat. The woman was ancient, not in the tired, weathered way of old humans, but in the timeless, dangerous way of predators who had survived centuries through cunning rather than strength. Her silver-white hair was braided with small crystals and dark feathers, and her eyes held the kind of knowledge that came from watching empires rise and fall. "Miss Frost," Commander Frost said formally, "may I present Oracle Vera Starweaver, keeper of the ancient visions and advisor to 4 generations of high seers." Dakota scrambled to her feet, suddenly aware that she was in the presence of seer royalty. Oracle Vera was a legend, the last of the ancient prophets who remembered visions from before the Great Suppression, when seers had power beyond just glimpsing possible futures. "Your Grace," Dakota stammered, then caught herself. "I mean, Oracle. I apologize. I don't know the proper." "Child," Oracle Vera interrupted, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "In 3 days, you're going to go mad unless something changes dramatically. We don't have time for proper etiquette." She moved into the room with fluid grace, settling into the single chair as if it were a throne. Commander Frost retreated to the doorway, clearly planning to stand guard. "I've come to make you an offer," the Oracle continued. "One that could save your sanity, if you're brave enough to accept it." Dakota's heart began to race. "What kind of offer?" "The kind that your great-grandmother would have understood." Oracle Vera's eyes glittered in the lamplight. "Tell me, child, what do you know about your bloodline? Your real bloodline. Not the watered-down story Maven told you about mad prophets and vision-sick frauds." Dakota sat back down hard on the bed. "I don't know anything about my real bloodline. Maven found me when I was 6. I don't remember anything from before then." "Of course you don't. Memory suppression was part of the binding ritual." The Oracle leaned forward, studying Dakota's face with uncomfortable intensity. "But bindings weaken over time, especially under extreme emotional stress. Tell me, have you noticed anything unusual in the past few days? Dreams, perhaps? Flashes of scenes that feel like memories but couldn't possibly be yours?" Dakota's mouth went dry. "How did you?" "Because I cast the original binding 17 years ago, at the request of a dying woman who wanted to protect her granddaughter from enemies who would kill her for her heritage." Oracle Vera's expression softened slightly. "Your real name isn't Dakota Frost, child. It's Dakota Starweaver, last surviving heir of the Celestial Crown bloodline." The room spun around Dakota as memories she'd dismissed as fever dreams suddenly snapped into focus. A woman with violet eyes singing prophecies in an ancient tongue. A man with eyes like starlight teaching her to read the veil patterns. a burning compound and screams, and someone shoving her into a cave while shouting about protection rituals and hidden bloodlines. The celestial crown bloodline, she whispered. But that's extinct. Everyone knows the Starweavers were wiped out during the Purge Wars. Everyone knows what we wanted them to know, Oracle Vera corrected. Your grandmother, Celestia Starweaver, was the most powerful oracle in recorded history. She could read futures across entire kingdoms, could walk the veil for days without losing herself, could work prophecy magic that shaped reality itself. She was also smart enough to know that power like that makes you a target. So she hid me. She died protecting you, the oracle said quietly, along with the rest of your family. When the coalition of lesser alphas decided that the Starweaver bloodline had become too powerful to allow to continue, you were 6 years old, the sole survivor, hidden away with binding rituals that would suppress your abilities until you were old enough to claim them safely. Dakota felt like she was drowning. You're saying I'm what? Some kind of secret Seer princess. I'm saying you're the genetic descendant of the most powerful prophetic bloodline in recorded history, and that your abilities have been artificially suppressed for 17 years. Oracle Vera stood, moving to the window to stare out at the starlit courtyard. I'm also saying that those bindings are starting to crack, and in 7 days you're going to need every advantage you can get. But if I'm so powerful, why haven't I felt it? Why am I still just? Because power without training is just dangerous potential. The oracle turned back to face her. Which brings me to my offer. I can break the binding rituals tonight. I can give you access to your full heritage, your complete abilities, everything your bloodline should have granted you from birth. Dakota's heart hammered against her ribs. What's the catch? Oracle Vera smiled, showing teeth that were too sharp to be entirely human. Smart girl. The catch is that 17 years of suppressed power released all at once will either kill you or transform you into something beyond current Seer understanding. There's no middle ground, no partial awakening. You either survive the transition and become what you were born to be, or you die in the process. And if I don't take the offer? Then you face Alpha Ashwood with the abilities of an average rogue Seer, and you go mad in approximately 30 seconds after the trial begins. The choice, when laid out like that, didn't feel like much of a choice at all. What would I become? Dakota asked. If I survived the transition, what exactly would I be? Oracle Vera's expression grew distant, as if she was seeing something far beyond the stone walls of the tower. You would become what your great-grandmother was before the other alphas grew too frightened to let her live, she said softly. A true oracle queen, a seer who can read futures across kingdoms, who can walk the veil beyond normal limits, who can work the ancient prophecy magic that shaped the world before wolves learned to fear what they couldn't control. She paused, meeting Dakota's eyes directly. You would become powerful enough that Alpha Thorne Ashwood would kneel at your feet and beg for the mercy he never showed you. The image was intoxicating. Dakota could almost see it, Thorne's face when he realized what she truly was. Maven's horror when she understood what she'd thrown away. The entire supernatural world learning that the Starweaver bloodline hadn't died out after all. But she could also imagine dying in agony as 17 years of suppressed power tore her apart from the inside. How long do I have to decide? She asked. The ritual must be performed at midnight on the night before your challenge, Oracle Vera replied. The stars will be at their strongest alignment, and you'll need every advantage the celestial cycle can provide. That gives you 4 days to choose. Continue as you are and go mad as a forgotten rogue, or risk everything for the chance to reclaim your birthright. She moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing, child. If you choose the ritual and survive, there will be no going back. You cannot suppress power once it's been awakened, cannot pretend to be small and harmless once you've shown the world what you truly are. You will spend the rest of your life as either a queen or a target. And if I'm both? Oracle Vera's smile was sharp as winter starlight. Then the supernatural world is about to become a much more interesting place. Chapter 5. 4 days had never felt shorter or longer simultaneously. Dakota spent them in a strange liminal space between her old life and whatever came next. During the day, she trained with Commander Frost and his best vision walkers, learning basic mental defense techniques that felt laughably inadequate against an alpha of Thorne's caliber. During the evenings, she pored over ancient texts that Oracle Vera had provided, scrolls and prophecy records written in the old tongue that her suppressed memories were slowly helping her decipher. And during the long sleepless nights, she wrestled with a decision that would either save her life or end it more dramatically than Thorne ever could. On the third night, she had an unexpected visitor. The knock was soft, almost apologetic. When Dakota opened the door, she found herself face to face with a young woman about her own age, someone with the kind of ethereal beauty that marked high-ranking Seer nobility, silver-blonde hair, perfect features, and eyes the color of deep amethyst. "Miss Frost," the woman said hesitantly. "My name is Iris Moonwhisper. I was supposed to be Alpha Thorne's chosen bond before you complicated things." Dakota blinked in surprise. She'd heard whispers about Iris Moonwhisper, daughter of the Western Council's lead seer, blessed with both beauty and political connections, the kind of perfect match that powerful families arranged for their heirs. "I'm sorry," Dakota said automatically, then caught herself. "Actually, no. I'm not sorry. You're better off without him." Iris's laugh was bitter. "That's what I came to tell you, actually. You're not the first bond he's rejected." She stepped into the room uninvited, her nervous energy filling the small space. "May I sit? This is complicated." Dakota gestured to the chair, settling onto the bed herself. "Complicated how?" "Thorne and I have known each other since childhood. Our families always assumed we'd eventually bond. Good bloodlines, compatible territories, all the usual political advantages." Iris's hands twisted in her lap. "But when we both came of age and no prophecy bond appeared, my father pushed for an arranged binding anyway. Political alliance masquerading as destiny. But Thorne refused. Oh no. He was perfectly willing to go through with it until 4 months ago, when he met his true prophesied bond during a border negotiation." Iris's expression darkened. "A beautiful seer from the Southern Territories named Aurora Nightshade. The bond was immediate, powerful, undeniable." Dakota felt something cold settle in her stomach. What happened to her? "The same thing that almost happened to you, except she wasn't brave enough to fight back." Iris's voice was flat with suppressed anger. He bound her as a servant publicly, claimed she wasn't suitable for an alpha of his standing. She accepted it quietly like a good little wolf and disappeared into exile. "And then he found me." "And then he found you." Iris met Dakota's eyes directly. "Do you want to know the real reason he rejected you so viciously? It wasn't because you weren't good enough. It was because you were too good. The prophecy bond between you two was stronger than anything he'd ever experienced. Stronger even than what he felt for Aurora. And that terrified him." The room fell silent as Dakota processed this information. Everything she'd assumed about Thorne's motivations, about her own unworthiness, suddenly looked different through this lens. "He's afraid of genuine connection," she said slowly. "He's afraid of losing control," Iris corrected. "Thorne has spent his entire life being told he's destined for greatness, that he'll unite the council territories through strategic alliances and careful political maneuvering. The idea of being genuinely vulnerable to someone, of needing them in ways he can't control or manipulate, it goes against everything he thinks he is." Dakota stood and walked to the window, staring out at the starlit courtyard where she would either lose her mind or claim her power in less than 24 hours. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I've spent the last 4 days watching the political fallout from your challenge," Iris said. "The other alphas are nervous, not about the trial itself. Everyone assumes Thorne will win easily. They are nervous about what happens after. After? Think about it. You've just demonstrated that bound seers have more legal rights than anyone realized. You've shown that the old laws can be invoked by anyone brave enough to use them. Word is already spreading to other territories, other packs." Iris's voice grew more intense. "There's talk of other rejected seers coming forward, of challenges being issued against alphas who thought they were untouchable." Dakota turned back to face her visitor. "You think I've started something?" "I think you've lit a fuse that's been waiting to explode for decades," Iris said bluntly. "And I think the established power structure is about to do everything they can to snuff it out before it spreads." She stood and moved toward the door, then paused. "There's something else you should know. Thorne isn't planning to fight fair." Dakota's blood chilled. "What do you mean?" "I mean he's been meeting with a vision enhancer named Victor Shadowmind, someone who specializes in augmenting alpha abilities for important trials." Iris's expression was grim. "It's not technically illegal since the enhancers are derived from natural seer hormones, but it's definitely not sporting. So he gets to be supernaturally enhanced, and I get to be naturally insane. Unless you find your own advantages." Iris reached into her jacket and pulled out a small leather journal. This belonged to Aurora Nightshade. She left it behind when she went into exile, and I thought you might find it useful. Dakota took the journal, feeling the weight of secrets in its worn leather binding. What's in it? Everything she learned about Thorne during their brief time together. His vision style, his weaknesses, his fears. Iris smiled grimly. Turns out rejected seers make very thorough intelligence gatherers. She moved toward the door again, then stopped one final time. Dakota, whatever you're planning for tomorrow night, whatever advantages you think you might have, be careful. The political implications of you actually winning are staggering. There are wolves who would rather see you dead than see the power structure change. Are you one of them? Iris's smile was sharp as a blade. Honey, I've spent my entire life being told my only value was as breeding stock for powerful alphas. If you can tear down that system and rebuild it into something better, you have my full support. After she left, Dakota sat on her bed with Aurora's journal in her lap, afraid to open it. Part of her didn't want to know Thorne's secrets, didn't want to understand him better than she already did. It was easier to hate someone when they remained a mystery. But easier wasn't going to keep her sane tomorrow night. She opened the journal and began to read. Day 1. Met my prophesied bond today. Alpha Thorne Ashwood of the Northern Territories. The connection hit like lightning. I've never felt anything so intense. He seemed equally affected, but there was something in his eyes. Fear. Why would an alpha fear his own bond? Day 3. Thorne keeps avoiding being alone with me. When we are together, he's charming but distant, like he's playing a role instead of being himself. I catch him watching me sometimes, and the hunger in his gaze makes my instincts sing. But then he looks away and becomes cold again. Day 7. I think I understand now. He's not afraid of me. He's afraid of how much he wants me. Afraid of how the prophecy bond makes him feel out of control. He told me tonight that alphas can't afford to show weakness, can't afford to need anyone more than they need him. Day 12. He's going to reject me. I can see it in the way he's pulling back, the way he talks about political necessities and appropriate matches. Part of me wants to fight for what we have, but I'm tired of begging for scraps of affection from someone who sees connection as a weakness. Dakota closed the journal, her hand shaking slightly. She'd expected tactical information about vision techniques or mental vulnerabilities. Instead, she'd found something much more dangerous. Understanding. Thorne wasn't just a cruel alpha who enjoyed destroying lesser seers. He was a man so terrified of vulnerability that he'd rather destroy his own happiness than risk being genuinely known by someone. The question was, would that knowledge help her survive tomorrow night? Or would it get her killed by making her hesitate at a crucial moment? Outside her window, the stars were moving toward their alignment, and Oracle Vera's midnight deadline was approaching fast. The next 24 hours would determine whether she reclaimed her birthright or lost everything trying. Dakota opened the journal again, reading deeper into Aurora's observations about Thorne's vision patterns, his tells, his weaknesses. If she was going to do this, if she was going to risk the awakening ritual and face him in the veil, she needed every advantage she could gather, even if those advantages came from understanding the broken heart of the man who had tried to destroy her. Chapter 6. Midnight came with the sound of footsteps on stone. Dakota had been awake for hours, staring at the star-filled sky through her narrow window and wrestling with the decision that would define the rest of her life. Oracle Vera's offer sat like a weight in her chest: risk everything for power, or face Thorne with nothing but determination and go mad within minutes. When the ancient seer entered her cell, she moved with the fluid grace of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. Have you decided, child? Oracle Vera asked without preamble. Dakota took a deep breath. I have questions first. Of course you do. Ask them quickly. The star's power peaks in less than an hour, and we'll need every moment if you choose the ritual. If I survive the awakening, what exactly will I become? Dakota asked. You said I'd be like my great-grandmother, but what does that actually mean in practical terms? Oracle Vera settled into the chair, her ancient eyes reflecting starlight like a predator's. Celestia Starweaver could read prophecy threads across a 100-mile radius, not suggest, not glimpse, but read them with perfect clarity. She could walk the veil for weeks without losing herself to madness. She could shift into vision states that don't exist in normal seer understanding. She paused, letting that sink in. She could also work the ancient prophecy magic, call storms through future sight, heal mortal wounds by reading alternate timelines, see through the eyes of any seer in her territory. At the height of her power, she was essentially a one-woman oracle network with supernatural intelligence gathering. And the other alphas killed her because they were afraid. They killed her because she was planning to unite all council territories under a single vision, her own. She believed that scattered, feuding pacts made all seers vulnerable to human discovery and persecution. She wanted to create a shadow nation, a supernatural kingdom that could protect our people properly. Dakota felt a chill that had nothing to do with the stone walls around her. She wanted to rule them all. She wanted to save them all, Oracle Vera corrected. The methods were debatable, but her goals were noble, even if her approach was authoritarian. And you think I'd make the same choices? The Oracle's smile was enigmatic. I think you'd make your own choices. The question is whether you'll live long enough to make any choices at all. Dakota stood and walked to the window, looking out at the starlit courtyard where tomorrow night's trial would take place. She could see workers already setting up the veiled chamber, a circular space marked with ancient symbols, surrounded by tiered seating for the hundreds of spectators who would come to watch her lose her mind. There's something else, she said quietly. I've been having dreams. Not the suppressed memories you mentioned. New dreams. Dreams where I'm standing in that chamber and I'm different, stronger, but also angry. Angrier than I've ever been in my life. Power amplifies what's already inside you, Oracle Vera said carefully. If you're carrying rage, awakening your abilities will make that rage proportionally stronger as well. What if I can't control it? What if I become something worse than the alphas who destroyed my family? The question hung in the air between them like a sword ready to fall. Oracle Vera was quiet for a long moment, studying Dakota with the intensity of someone seeing all the way through to her soul. Do you know what your great-grandmother's greatest strength was? She asked finally. Her power. Her doubt. The Oracle stood and moved to stand beside Dakota at the window. Celestia questioned every decision, agonized over every choice, constantly worried that she was becoming the very thing she'd set out to fight against. It was that doubt, that constant self-examination, that kept her human even when she wielded godlike power. She placed a weathered hand on Dakota's shoulder. The fact that you're afraid of becoming a monster is the best evidence I have that you won't become one. Monsters don't worry about their own monstrosity. Dakota closed her eyes, feeling the weight of generations pressing down on her shoulders. Her family's legacy, her people's survival, her own desperate need to prove that she was worth more than the world had told her. If I do this, she said slowly, and if I survive both the awakening and the trial, what happens next? Do I just go home? Pretend to be normal? Oracle Vera laughed, a sound like silver bells in a winter storm. Child, if you survive tomorrow night as a fully awakened Starweaver, normal will never be an option again. Every alpha in the council will either want to serve you or destroy you. Every rejected seer will look to you as either salvation or false hope. Every human government will add you to their supernatural threat assessment lists. You're not exactly selling this. I'm being honest about the cost. The Oracle's expression grew serious. Power always comes with a price. The question is whether you're willing to pay it to save your own sanity and possibly change the world in the process. Dakota thought about Maven, crying silent tears as she signed away Dakota's life for political convenience. About Thorne, so terrified of genuine connection that he'd rather destroy his own bond than risk being vulnerable. About Aurora Nightshade and countless other seers who'd been cast aside by a system that treated them as disposable. About the workers in the courtyard below, setting up a chamber where she was expected to go mad quietly and let the status quo continue unchanged. There's one more thing I need to know, she said. The ritual, what are the actual odds of survival? Oracle Vera was quiet for so long that Dakota began to think she wouldn't answer. Historically, the ancient seer said finally, about 1 in 4. But those statistics include seers who attempted the awakening ritual without proper bloodline heritage, without emotional catalyst, without desperate need driving them forward. And with all those factors, your odds improved to perhaps 1 in 3. Dakota felt her stomach drop. 6 to 7% chance of death just from the ritual itself, before she even faced Thorne. Yes, but 100% chance of madness if you face him without it. The mathematics are brutal but clear. Die almost certainly trying to become powerful enough to survive, or go mad absolutely certainly as the seer she currently was. She turned away from the window and met Oracle Vera's ancient gaze directly. What do I need to do? The Oracle's smile was proud and terrified in equal measure. Are you certain? Once we begin, there's no turning back. Either you'll emerge as one of the most powerful supernatural beings on the planet, or you'll die in more agony than any seer should ever experience. I'm certain. Then we begin now. Remove your clothes. The ritual requires direct contact between your skin and the starlight. As Dakota undressed, Oracle Vera began pulling items from a leather bag that seemed to contain far more than its size should allow. Crystalline vials filled with luminescent liquid, carved bones that looked ancient beyond measure, a knife with a blade that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The process has 3 stages, the Oracle explained as she arranged the items in a precise pattern around the small room. First, I'll break the binding rituals that have suppressed your abilities since childhood. This will feel like your mind is being torn away from the inside. Lovely. Second, your true vision will emerge for the first time. This may involve consciousness expansion beyond normal perception. Your great-grandmother's prophetic range was unique. This stage typically causes loss of consciousness from the sensory overload. And the third stage. Oracle Vera paused in her preparations, meeting Dakota's eyes with something that might have been compassion. The third stage is when your human consciousness merges with your awakened abilities. If your mind can't handle the power, if the rage or pain or sheer overwhelming sensation breaks your sanity. She shrugged eloquently. I go mad. You go mad, and I'll be forced to end you before you can hurt innocent people. Dakota nodded, surprised by how calm she felt. Maybe she was already going mad and the ritual would just make it official. One last question, she said. If I survive all 3 stages, will I still be me? Will I still be Dakota? Or will I become someone else entirely? Oracle Vera's expression softened. You'll still be you, child. Just more than you ever imagined you could be. Outside, the stars reached their zenith, flooding the stone room with silver-white light. It's time, Oracle Vera said, raising the obsidian knife toward the window. Are you ready to discover what you truly are? Dakota took a deep breath and stepped into the center of the ritual circle. I'm ready. The first cut drew blood that gleamed like liquid starlight in the celestial beams, and the ancient words Oracle Vera spoke seemed to make the very air vibrate with power. The breaking had begun. Chapter 7. The first stage felt like being struck by lightning from the inside out. Dakota's scream echoed off the stone walls as Oracle Vera's blade traced symbols across her arms, each cut releasing 17 years of suppressed power in violent bursts. The binding rituals shattered like glass, and with each break, memories flooded back with crystalline clarity. A woman with violet eyes lifting her toward the stars. You are the Veil's daughter, little star. Never forget what you are. Fire consuming her childhood home while her grandmother fought a dozen attackers at once. Run, little star. Run and hide until you're strong enough to reclaim what's yours. Maven, finding her in the cave 4 days later, terrified and alone. I'll keep you safe, child. But we must never speak of what you were before. The memories came faster now, 17 years of suppressed identity crashing back in waves that left her gasping. She remembered her real name, her real heritage, the prophecies her grandmother had sung in the old tongue that spoke of power and responsibility and the terrible weight of leadership. Stage 1 complete, Oracle Vera announced, her voice sounding distant and strange. Your bindings are broken. Can you hear me, child? Dakota tried to answer, but her voice emerged as something between a sob and a howl. The pain was indescribable, but underneath it, she could feel something else building. Power, raw, ancient, terrible power that made her skin feel too small to contain it. Stage 2 begins now, the Oracle warned. Try not to fight what's coming. The transformation started in her mind. Dakota had glimpsed visions hundreds of times throughout her life, and it had always been brief, fragmentary, like looking through a keyhole at possible futures. This was nothing like that. This felt like her consciousness was being rewritten from the inside out, like her very perception was being reforged in cosmic fire. Her vision, when it finally emerged, was nothing like the weak flickers she'd always experienced. She could suddenly see everything, not just one future or one possibility, but thousands of them simultaneously, branching and diverging like a vast tree of probability. She could see herself going mad in the Veil Chamber tomorrow. She could see herself defeating Thorne. She could see herself dying during this very ritual. She could see timelines where she conquered the Council, where she fled into exile, where she never challenged Thorne at all. The sheer overwhelming cascade of information would have driven anyone mad, but something in Dakota's awakened bloodline knew how to filter it, how to navigate the infinite branches without losing herself completely. But it was the third stage that nearly killed her. As her consciousness merged with her awakened abilities, Dakota felt her mind expand beyond anything she'd thought possible. Suddenly, She could sense every seer within miles, their locations, their emotions, their vision threads. She could feel the pull of their prophetic gifts, the instinctive recognition of her superior bloodline that made them want to defer to her even from a distance. She could also feel their fear. Word of her challenge had spread throughout the supernatural community, and dozens of powerful seers had come to witness tomorrow night's spectacle. They were all here now, in the council complex and the surrounding areas, and they were all terrified of what she might become. Good, her awakened instincts purred with vicious satisfaction. Let them fear us. Let them understand what it means to underestimate a Starweaver. But it was what she sensed from the council chambers that made her blood run cold. High Seer Celeste wasn't alone in her private quarters. She was meeting with 3 other alphas, powerful wolves whose territories bordered the council's most strategic resources, and they were planning to ensure that tomorrow night's challenge ended with Dakota's death, regardless of the outcome of her trial with Thorne. We cannot allow a Starweaver to survive, Alpha Marcus Ironforge was saying, his words carrying clearly to her enhanced senses. If she defeats Thorne, she'll have legal claim to his territory and resources. If she goes mad fighting him, she becomes a martyr that other rejected seers might rally around. Either outcome destabilizes the current power structure. The girl must die, Alpha Vincent Shadowcrest agreed. But it must look natural. An accident during the trial, perhaps, or a mental collapse from the stress of walking the veil beyond her abilities. I have contacts among the chamber workers, Alpha David Stormclaw added. Void dust in the vision circle would weaken her consciousness considerably, make her vulnerable to a breaking that might not otherwise succeed. High Seer Celeste's ancient voice was thoughtful. And if she proves more resilient than expected? Then we activate the contingency plan, Alpha Marcus said grimly. Psychic blades from the spectator galleries. Make it look like rogue mindhunters infiltrated the crowd. The council mourns a tragic attack, and the Starweaver bloodline dies with her. Dakota's transformed consciousness reeled with the implications. The challenge itself was meaningless. They'd never intended to let her survive, regardless of whether she won or lost. She was a threat to be eliminated, not a legal combatant to be respected. They fear us because they know what we could become, her awakened power snarled. They remember what grandmother could do, and they won't risk letting history repeat itself. But there was something else in the supernatural currents around the complex, something that made her newly awakened instincts prickle with warning. Maven was here. Her former pack leader was in one of the guest quarters, and she wasn't alone. Thorne was with her, along with someone whose psychic signature felt wrong in ways that made Dakota's enhanced senses recoil. She focused her attention on that room, using abilities she was still learning to understand, and what she discovered made her stomach turn. Enhancement process is complete, a voice like grinding stone was saying. The Alpha's vision depth has been tripled, his mental barriers doubled, his prophetic resistance accelerated beyond normal seer parameters. The girl won't survive 30 seconds in the veil. And the side effects? Maven's voice was small and worried. Temporary, the stranger assured her. Enhanced aggression, reduced empathy, possible loss of rational thought during deep vision. But these fade within hours of the enhancer wearing off. You're turning him into a monster, Maven whispered. I'm ensuring the natural order remains intact. Thorne's voice was different now, harder, more vicious than she'd ever heard it. The Starweaver bloodline ends tomorrow night, and Seer society remains stable. Dakota felt her enhanced consciousness processing the information at superhuman speed. Thorne had been chemically altered to ensure her death. The High Seer and her allies were planning to assassinate her if she somehow survived the rigged trial. Maven had helped orchestrate the entire trap, and was now having second thoughts that came 24 hours too late. She was surrounded by enemies who had planned her destruction down to the smallest detail. Then we give them something to truly fear, her power growled. Let them see what happens when they back a Starweaver into a corner. Dakota. Oracle Vera's voice cut through her expanding awareness like a blade. Focus on my voice. You're losing yourself to the power. Come back to me. With tremendous effort, Dakota pulled her consciousness back from its supernatural expansion and focused on the ancient seer kneeling beside her. Oracle Vera's face was pale with concern, and Dakota realized she'd been unconscious for several minutes while her awakened abilities ran wild. I'm back, she managed, her voice still carrying harmonics that made the stone walls vibrate. How do you feel? Dakota took inventory of her transformed body and expanded consciousness. The pain was gone, replaced by a sense of power that was both intoxicating and terrifying. She could feel every heartbeat in the complex, could sense the emotional states of seers miles away, could read prophecy threads with a thought. She had become exactly what her great-grandmother had been, a supernatural apex predator with abilities that transcended normal seer limitations. I feel. She started, then stopped as the full implications hit her. Oracle, they are not planning to let me survive tomorrow night, regardless of whether I win the challenge. What do you mean? Dakota quickly explained what she'd overheard using her enhanced senses. Oracle Vera's expression grew darker with each revelation. I feared as much, the ancient seer said when Dakota finished. The political implications of your survival are too significant for them to leave to chance. So what do? I can't run, they'd hunt me down. I can't hide, they know what I am now. And I can't fight them all, even with these new abilities. Oracle Vera was quiet for a long moment, studying Dakota with calculating eyes. There is one option, she said finally. But it's risky beyond measure, and it will change everything. Tell me. We don't wait for tomorrow night's challenge. We act tonight, while they think you're still weak and unprepared. The Oracle's smile was sharp as winter starlight. We remind the Seer world why the Starweaver bloodline was feared enough to require genocide. Dakota felt her enhanced abilities purr with anticipation. What did you have in mind? Revolution, child. Swift, decisive, and absolutely terrifying. Oracle Vera stood, power radiating from her ancient frame. It's time to show them what happens when they underestimate a seer with nothing left to lose. Chapter 8. The council chamber doors exploded inward at precisely 2 minutes past midnight. Dakota strode through the splintered wood with Oracle Vera at her side, her transformed consciousness radiating power that made the very air shimmer with prophetic energy. The council guards stationed outside hadn't even had time to raise an alarm. Her enhanced abilities had sent them into mental submission before they could react. High Seer Celeste looked up from her private council with the 3 conspirator alphas, her ancient face registering genuine shock for the first time in centuries. Impossible, Alpha Marcus Ironforge breathed. The ritual wasn't supposed to happen until tomorrow night. Surprise, Dakota said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the crystal chandeliers ring like bells. Turns out when you plan someone's assassination in elaborate detail, they tend to take preemptive action. She shifted her perception slightly, a process that now took less than a heartbeat, and stood before them in her full awakened presence. Her pale blue eyes now blazed with violet starlight, and her consciousness seemed to fill the room like an invisible presence that made even the High Seer flinch. Dakota Starweaver, High Seer Celeste said slowly, using her true name for the first time. You've made a terrible mistake coming here. Have I? Dakota stepped further into the chamber, her enhanced senses monitoring every seer in the complex. Because from where I'm standing, the only mistake was trusting that you'd honor the laws you claim to uphold. She turned her gaze to each of the conspirator alphas in turn. Void dust in the vision circle, Alpha Stormclaw? Really? I expected more creativity from someone of your reputation. Alpha David went pale. You couldn't possibly know. I know everything that happens within 100 miles of me, Dakota interrupted. Every conversation, every heartbeat, every desperate plan to ensure I don't survive long enough to become a threat to your comfortable little power structure. She focused on Alpha Marcus next. Psychic blades from the galleries, dressed as rogue mind hunters to provide plausible deniability. Tell me, did it ever occur to you that maybe, just maybe, if you need to assassinate someone to maintain your power, you don't deserve that power in the first place? This is treason. Alpha Vincent Shadowcrest snarled, starting to gather his prophetic energy. You dare threaten us in the High Seer zone. Dakota's power lashed out like a whip, and suddenly Vincent was frozen mid-manifestation, his consciousness caught between vision states in what looked like agonizing suspension. I'm not threatening you, she said softly. I'm giving you information about what happens next. You can choose to listen, or you can choose to test whether I'm bluffing about my abilities. But I promise you, my great-grandmother could command any seer within her range. I inherited that ability, along with several others you've probably forgotten about. She released Vincent, who collapsed to the floor gasping. The other alphas took several steps back. Your Grace. Oracle Vera spoke for the first time, her ancient voice carrying the weight of centuries. The Starweaver bloodline was eliminated because Celestia wanted to unite all council territories under a single vision. The conspiracy succeeded because you sanctioned it, because you feared losing your own throne to someone more powerful than yourself. High Seer Celeste's expression hardened. That was necessary for the stability. Necessary for your continued rule, Oracle Vera corrected. But now her granddaughter stands before you, awakened and aware of the full scope of your betrayal. The question is, what happens next? The chamber fell silent as everyone processed the implications. Dakota could feel the supernatural currents shifting as seers throughout the complex became aware of her presence and power. Some were afraid, others were curious. A few felt something that might have been hope. "I'm going to make you an offer," Dakota said, addressing High Seer Celeste directly. "One chance to salvage this situation without bloodshed. I'm listening. You allow my challenge against Thorne to proceed as planned, but fairly. No enhancements on his side, no assassination attempts on mine, no rigged vision circles. Just two seers settling a legal dispute according to your own laws." She paused, letting that sink in. "If he defeats me legitimately, I accept the outcome and leave the council territories forever. And if you win?" "If I win, I claim the territory I'm legally entitled to, and you stop treating rejected seers like disposable garbage." Dakota's voice grew harder. "I'm not trying to overthrow you or unite the territories or recreate my grandmother's empire. I just want to live without constantly looking over my shoulder for the next political knife aimed at my back." Alpha Marcus laughed bitterly. "You expect us to believe you'll be content with a single territory? That you won't use your abilities to expand your power until you control everything? I expect you to honor your own laws," Dakota shot back. "Or admit that Seer justice is a fiction designed to protect the powerful and crush anyone who dares challenge the status quo." She turned in a slow circle, addressing not just the conspirators but every seer whose enhanced senses were monitoring this confrontation from elsewhere in the complex. "I know you're all listening. Every alpha, every oracle, every seer who came to watch me go mad tomorrow night for your entertainment." Her voice carried through prophetic channels and supernatural pathways, reaching hundreds of listeners simultaneously. "You've been told I'm a threat to stability, that I'm dangerous, that the Starweaver bloodline deserved extinction." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "But ask yourselves, who decided that? Who declared my family too dangerous to exist? Who wrote the laws that make it legal for powerful alphas to reject and destroy their bonds with impunity?" Her eyes blazed brighter. "It was the same wolves who benefit most from keeping the rest of you in line. The same wolves who are planning to murder me tomorrow because they are terrified of what might happen if you all realize you have more power than they've let you believe." The supernatural currents in the complex shifted as her words hit home. She could feel doubts spreading through the assembled seers, questions that had been suppressed for generations suddenly demanding answers. "Your Grace," she said, turning back to High Seer Celeste. "You have until dawn to decide. Either you honor your laws and let my challenge proceed fairly, or I invoke my grandmother's legacy and start doing things the way she would have done them. Is that a threat?" "It's a choice." Dakota's smile was sharp. "My grandmother wanted to rule through force because she believed seers needed a strong hand to survive. I'd prefer to live in a world where justice actually means something, where legal rights aren't just convenient fictions for the powerful to hide behind." She started toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and one more thing. I know about the enhancements Thorne received. Whatever that mind worker gave him, it needs to be reversed before tomorrow night, or the challenge is forfeit and I claim my recompense by default." "You can't possibly prove." "I can sense the psychic corruption in his system from here," Dakota interrupted Alpha Marcus. "My abilities include detecting supernatural alterations to seer biology. So either he fights me clean, or you admit publicly that you rigged the challenge and accept the legal consequences." She walked toward the door, Oracle Vera falling into step beside her. The council guards stepped aside automatically, their consciousnesses recognizing her superior bloodline even if their human minds hadn't caught up yet. "Dakota." High Seer Celeste's voice stopped her at the threshold. "If I agree to your terms, if the challenge proceeds fairly and you win, what then? What do you actually want?" She looked back over her shoulder at the ancient monarch who had sanctioned her family's genocide and nearly succeeded in finishing the job. "I want what every rejected seer wants, Your Grace, to be seen as something more than a political inconvenience. To have my worth determined by my choices rather than my bloodline or my beauty or how useful I am to someone else's ambitions." Her eyes found each of the conspirator alphas in turn. "And I want you all to remember this moment. Remember what happened when you cornered a Starweaver and assumed she'd go mad quietly. Because the next rejected seer who invokes their rights might not be as interested in peaceful solutions as I am." The walk back to her tower was surreal. Every seer she passed felt her power and either bowed their heads in submission or stared in shocked recognition. By the time she reached her quarters, the entire complex was buzzing with news of her transformation. Oracle Vera followed her inside, her ancient face proud and worried in equal measure. "That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever witnessed," she said. "Maybe both." Dakota collapsed onto her bed, suddenly exhausted despite her enhanced abilities. "Do you think they'll agree to fair terms? I think you've given them no choice. If they refuse, you've already exposed their conspiracy to every seer in listening range. The political fallout would be catastrophic." Oracle Vera settled into the chair. "But be prepared for them to try something subtle. They are cornered now, which makes them desperate." Dakota nodded, her enhanced senses monitoring the supernatural currents throughout the complex. She could feel the High Seer and her conspirators arguing frantically, could sense Thorne's confusion and growing anger as he learned about the night's events, could feel Maven's overwhelming guilt and fear from her guest quarters. And underneath it all, she could feel something else, a building wave of hope from the complex's lower-ranking seers, servants and guards and minor pack members who had never dared to challenge the established order but were now watching a rejected seer stand up to the most powerful alphas in the council and survive. "We've started something," her awakened consciousness observed, "whether we intended to or not." "Oracle," Dakota said quietly, "what if I'm not strong enough for what comes next? What if I win tomorrow night and then discover I have no idea how to actually lead or change anything meaningful?" The ancient seer's smile was gentle. "Then you'll learn, child. The same way every leader throughout history has learned, by making mistakes, asking for help, and refusing to give up when things get difficult." She stood and moved toward the door. "Get some rest. Tomorrow night you face Thorne in a trial that will determine not just your fate, but possibly the future of every rejected seer in the council territories." She paused at the threshold. No pressure. After Oracle Vera left, Dakota lay in the darkness with her enhanced senses monitoring the complex's nighttime activities. She could feel Thorne's chemical enhancements being forcibly purged from his system by council healers, a painful process from what she could sense. Could feel the conspirators dispersing to their quarters with plans hastily revised. Could feel hundreds of seers throughout the complex wondering what tomorrow would bring. And in the guest quarters, she could feel Maven crying herself to sleep while whispering apologies that would never be heard. Dakota closed her eyes and tried to rest, but sleep wouldn't come. Tomorrow night would determine everything. Her future, her freedom, possibly her life. She'd gone from powerless rogue to supernatural apex predator in less than 24 hours, and now hundreds of seers were watching to see what she'd do with abilities that could reshape their entire society. No pressure indeed, she thought, staring at the ceiling as dawn approached. No pressure at all. Chapter 9. The Veil Sanctum was designed for spectacle, not fairness. Dakota stood in the center of the ancient vision circle as thousands of seers filled the surrounding tiers, their voices creating a wall of sound that would have been overwhelming before her transformation. Now her enhanced senses filtered the noise into individual conversations, letting her hear everything from excited betting on her survival time to whispered speculation about whether the Starweaver rumors were true. The stars hung full and bright overhead, their light turning the white marble sanctum into something ethereal and deadly. Across the circle, Thorne emerged from the Alpha's entrance to thunderous applause. Even purged of his chemical enhancements, he was magnificent, tall and powerful, moving with the predatory grace of someone who had never lost a vision trial in his life. His golden eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, the prophecy bond flared between them like lightning. She could feel his confusion, his anger, his reluctant admiration for what she'd become. And underneath it all, buried so deep he probably didn't recognize it himself, fear. High Seer Celeste stood in the royal box, her ancient voice magically amplified to carry across the sanctum. "We gather tonight to witness a legal challenge under the old laws," she announced. Dakota Starweaver, last heir of the Celestial Crown bloodline, has invoked the right of vision challenge against Alpha Thorne Ashwood of the Northern Territories. The use of her true name sent a ripple through the crowd. This wasn't just a rejected seer fighting for scraps anymore. This was the return of a bloodline that had once threatened to reshape seer society entirely. "The terms are clear," Celeste continued. "Shared vision trial in the deep veil. No mental barriers, no resistance, no mercy. Victory goes to submission, madness, or surrender." She paused, her eyes finding Dakota across the distance. Let it be known that this challenge proceeds under council witness with no interference from external parties. The outcome will be honored by all, regardless of personal preferences or political implications. The warning was clear. The conspirators had been told to stand down, at least for tonight. Combatants, prepare yourselves, High Seer Celeste commanded. On my signal, you may begin. Dakota closed her eyes and let her consciousness expand, feeling the veil open before her like a vast ocean of possibility. She was massive in this space now, her prophetic presence nearly overwhelming in its intensity, with vision threads that seemed to stretch to infinity and consciousness that blazed within a starlight. The crowd gasped at the sight of her transformed prophetic form. This was no ordinary seer. This was something out of legend, a consciousness that belonged in ancient stories about the first oracles themselves. Thorne manifested his own vision form, impressive but suddenly seeming almost limited in comparison. His golden prophetic energy bristled with aggression, but she could sense his uncertainty. This wasn't the easy victory he'd been promised when he agreed to the challenge. This was something else entirely. Begin, High Seer Celeste's voice cracked like a whip. Thorne struck immediately, diving deep into the veil and pulling her consciousness with him. He aimed for her core memories, a breaking technique designed to shatter her sense of self in seconds. Dakota's enhanced abilities made him seem to move in slow motion. She sidestepped his attack easily, using her superior prophetic range to redirect his strike into empty probability space. The force of his misdirected assault created ripples in the veil that the spectators could actually see. Thorne recovered with impressive speed and came at her again, this time trying to trap her consciousness in a recursive vision loop, a technique that could drive seers mad by forcing them to experience the same moment repeatedly until their minds broke. She caught his attack mid-formation, her prophetic threads wrapping around his with enough power to make him recoil in shock. But she didn't crush him. Not yet. Instead, she threw his consciousness away from hers like discarding something unwanted. The crowd's excited cheering faltered into confused murmurs. This wasn't a trial. It was a demonstration of overwhelming superiority. Thorne's vision form flickered as he struggled to maintain coherence. His prophetic energy was chaotic now, the careful strategy of a trained seer giving way to desperate survival instinct. His afraid, her awakened consciousness observed. Good. Let him feel what we felt when he tried to bind us as a servant in front of the world. But as Thorne circled warily in the veil, looking for an opening that didn't exist, Dakota felt something unexpected. Pity. She remembered Aurora's journal, the entries describing a man so terrified of vulnerability that he'd rather destroy his own happiness than risk being truly known. She remembered Oracle Vera's words about power amplifying what was already inside, and realized that what she felt wasn't murderous rage or revenge lust. It was disappointment. Disappointment that someone with so much potential had chosen fear over growth. That an alpha who could have been great had settled for being merely powerful. That her bond, the wolf the fates themselves had chosen for her, would rather break her than face his own emotional cowardice. Thorne lunged again, and this time Dakota didn't dodge. She let him strike at her consciousness directly, let his prophetic attack crash against her mental shields in what would have been a shattering blow against any ordinary seer. But her transformed mind was far from ordinary. His strike couldn't penetrate her awakened defenses. She felt the pressure but no pain, and the shocked confusion radiating from him was almost comical. This is what you rejected, she projected through their bond connection, knowing he could sense her thoughts even in the deep veil. This power, this heritage, this connection. You threw it all away because you were too afraid to be vulnerable. She pushed back with minimal effort, rising to her full prophetic presence so the entire sanctum could witness the massive Starweaver consciousness in all its terrifying glory. I could break you right now, she continued. End this in seconds and claim everything you tried to deny me. Your territory, your resources, your pack. Thorne's vision form wavered, his consciousness battered and bleeding prophetic energy. But instead of attacking again, he did something that shocked everyone watching. He submitted. His prophetic presence bowed in the veil, offering his core consciousness to her in a gesture of absolute surrender. The sanctum erupted in chaos. Alphas didn't submit, especially not to rejected bonds, especially not in public challenges with thousands of witnesses. But there was Thorne, the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories, offering his very mind to a seer he'd tried to destroy less than a week ago. Why? Dakota demanded through their connection. She felt his response, raw with emotions he'd spent a lifetime suppressing. Because you were right about all of it. I was so afraid of needing you that I convinced myself you weren't worth having. But standing here, seeing what you've become despite everything I did to break you." He lifted his consciousness slightly, meeting her blazing prophetic presence. "I don't deserve your mercy, but I'm asking for it anyway." Dakota stood frozen in the veil, torn between the satisfying simplicity of revenge and the complicated messiness of grace. Her awakened power wanted to crush him, wanted to make him pay for every moment of humiliation and pain. But her human heart remembered Aurora's journal entries, remembered that Thorne was as much a victim of the system as she was, just in a different way. He'd been taught that vulnerability was weakness, that genuine connection was dangerous, that an alpha's worth was measured in power rather than compassion. She could break him and prove that the strong survived by crushing the weak. Or she could spare him and prove that strength included choosing mercy when you had every right to choose violence. "Get up," she commanded through their bond. "This trial is over, but you're not broken yet." Thorne's consciousness rose slowly, trembling with a mixture of relief and shame. Dakota pulled them both back from the deep veil, their physical forms rematerializing in the vision circle. She stood bathed in starlight, power radiating from every inch of her transformed presence. Oracle Vera was already moving toward her with a robe, but Dakota's voice carried across the silent sanctum before she could cover herself. "I, Dakota Starweaver, claim victory in this challenge by submission," she announced. "As is my right under the old laws, I claim recompense equivalent to what I would have gained through the prophecy bond." She paused, letting the legal implications sink in for everyone watching. "However, I'm also invoking my right to negotiate the specific terms of that recompense with the defeated party. Rather than claiming Thorne's territory outright, I propose an alternative arrangement." High Seer Celeste leaned forward in her royal box, clearly fascinated by this unexpected development. "The northern territories will be split," Dakota continued. "Thorne retains control of the primary regions and his existing pack. But the borderlands, the territories where rejected seers and rogues currently struggle to survive, those become mine." She let her gaze sweep across the assembled crowd. "I establish a new pack for seers who have been cast aside by the current system. A place where your worth isn't determined by your bloodline or your political connections, but by your choices and your character." The sanctum erupted in shocked whispers. She was essentially creating a sanctuary for supernatural societies unwanted, and doing it with the legal authority that came from defeating an alpha in challenge. "Furthermore," she said, raising her voice over the commotion, "any alpha who rejects a true prophecy bond from this day forward must offer equivalent recompense directly to the rejected party. No more quiet disappearances. No more convenient exiles. No more seers being thrown away because they are politically inconvenient." She turned to face High Seer Celeste directly. "These terms are my official claim for recompense. I trust you'll honor them as you promised to honor the outcome of this challenge." The ancient monarch was silent for a long moment, her calculating eyes studying Dakota with new appreciation. "The terms are unusual," she said finally, "but legal under the old laws." "Very well, Dakota Starweaver. Your claim is recognized. The borderlands of the Northern Territories are hereby granted to you as sovereign territory, with full rights to establish pack law as you see fit." She stood from her throne, and her next words carried the weight of official decree. "Let it be known throughout all council territories that the Starweaver bloodline has returned. And let it also be known that the laws regarding prophecy bonds and rejection have been revised to include mandatory recompense. Any alpha who violates these terms will answer to the council." The crowd's reaction was mixed, excitement from the lower-ranking seers, concern from the established alphas, and something like hope from those who had experienced rejection themselves. Dakota pulled on the robe Oracle Vera provided, feeling the weight of thousands of eyes watching her every move. She'd come to this sanctum expecting to go mad, and instead she'd created something that might actually change Seer society for the better. Not bad for a rejected rogue, her consciousness purred with satisfaction. Thorne materialized beside her in physical form, looking smaller and more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. He approached slowly, keeping his head bowed in a gesture of continued submission. "Dakota," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "I know I don't deserve to ask this, but the prophecy bond, is there any chance?" She felt the connection between them, still present despite everything that had happened. The Fates' gift hadn't been destroyed by rejection or violence. It was still there, waiting to see what they would choose to do with it. "The bond exists," she said carefully. "But bonds require trust, Thorne. And right now, I don't trust you not to reject me again the moment it becomes politically convenient. His face crumpled with genuine pain. I understand. However, she continued, surprising herself, people can change. If you actually work on becoming someone capable of genuine vulnerability instead of just performing whatever role you think an alpha should play, maybe we can revisit this conversation in a few years. It wasn't forgiveness, and it certainly wasn't reconciliation. But it was possibility, which was more than either of them had a right to expect after everything that had happened. I'll earn it, Thorne promised. However long it takes, I'll prove I can be better than I was. We'll see, Dakota replied neutrally. She turned away from him and from the sanctum, Oracle Vera falling into step beside her as they walked toward the exit. Behind them, the crowd was already dispersing, thousands of conversations starting about what they'd just witnessed and what it might mean for the future. Quite the evening, Oracle Vera observed dryly. You've just rewritten Seer politics, established a sanctuary for rejected Seers, and left your bond alive but thoroughly humbled. Your grandmother would be proud. Would she? Dakota asked. She wanted to rule through force. I'm trying to change things through legal reform and setting an example. Exactly. The ancient Seer smiled. She tried to save Seer society by dominating it. You're trying to save it by proving that mercy and strength aren't mutually exclusive. It's a more subtle approach, but potentially more effective in the long term. They emerged from the sanctum into the cool night air, and Dakota took a deep breath of freedom. She was alive. She was powerful. She had territory and legal recognition and the chance to build something meaningful from the wreckage of her rejection. And she'd done it all without becoming the monster they'd expected her to be. Not bad for a week's work, she thought. Chapter 10. 3 months later, the borderlands of the Northern Territories had transformed in ways Dakota hadn't imagined possible. Where there had been struggling rogue camps, there were now established settlements. Where there had been desperate survival, there was now community. Rejected Seers from across the Council territories had come seeking sanctuary, and Dakota had welcomed them all. Her pack had grown to nearly 200 Seers, outcasts and rogues and those who simply didn't fit the traditional pack structure. They were building something new here, something that valued individuals for their contributions rather than their bloodlines. It wasn't perfect. There were still territorial disputes with neighboring packs, still political pressure from alphas who resented the changes she'd forced on their society. But every day brought new Seers seeking refuge, new stories of bonds invoking their rights to recompense, new evidence that the system was slowly changing. Maven had come to visit last week, asking for forgiveness that Dakota wasn't ready to give. But they'd talked, really talked, for the first time in months. Maybe someday they'd rebuild their relationship into something honest. Or maybe they wouldn't. Either way, Dakota was learning that she could survive without her guardian's approval. Thorne had kept his distance, working on his own territory and reportedly treating his pack members with unprecedented fairness. Dakota heard through Oracle Vera that he'd started counseling with a supernatural therapist, actually addressing the emotional issues that had led to his pattern of rejection. Whether that would be enough to salvage their prophecy bond remained to be seen, but at least he was trying. As for Dakota herself, she stood on the cliff overlooking her new territory, watching the sun set over lands that now belonged to her pack. Seers who had once been invisible were now building homes and lives and futures. The vista before her was breathtaking, rolling hills dotted with newly constructed cottages, training grounds where young Seers practiced their prophetic abilities without fear of judgment, communal gardens where her pack worked together to grow their own food. In the distance, she could see the vision hall they'd built, a place where any Seer could come to practice walking the veil in safety. It was everything she'd hoped for and more. We did it, her awakened consciousness said contentedly. We survived, we claimed our power, and we're using it to help others instead of crushing them. We did, Dakota agreed aloud, feeling the weight of responsibility and possibility in equal measure. A familiar presence approached from behind, Oracle Vera, her silver-white hair catching the dying sunlight. You have visitors, the ancient Seer said, settling beside Dakota on the cliff edge. 3 rejected Seers from the Eastern Territories. They heard about your sanctuary and traveled 2 weeks to get here. Dakota smiled. How bad are their situations? One was bound as a servant and escaped. One was expelled from her pack for refusing an arranged bond. The third. Oracle Vera's expression darkened. The third tried to invoke the right of vision challenge like you did, but her alpha killed her bondmate before the trial could take place. She barely escaped with her life. Dakota's hands clenched into fists, her prophetic energy crackling around her fingers. And the Alpha, claiming it was self-defense. The council is investigating, but you know how these things go. Without hard evidence, he'll likely walk free. Not this time. Dakota's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. I want everything you can find on this Alpha, his territory, his allies, his vulnerabilities. If the council won't enforce their own laws, I will. Oracle Vera's smile was sharp with approval. Now you're starting to sound like your grandmother. The difference is, I'm not trying to conquer anyone, Dakota corrected. I'm just ensuring that rejected seers know they have somewhere to turn when the system fails them, that they are not alone anymore. She turned from the vista to face the ancient seer directly. Speaking of which, I've been thinking about expanding our operations. The borderlands are stable now, but there are rejected seers all over the council territories who don't even know their rights exist. I want to send out emissaries, people who can spread the word about what we're building here. Ambitious, Oracle Vera observed, and politically dangerous. The Alphas are already nervous about your growing influence. If you start actively recruiting from their territories, then they can try to stop me legally, Dakota finished. I'm not breaking any laws. I'm simply ensuring that seers know they have options. If the Alphas don't like losing pack members, maybe they should treat them better. She walked back toward the settlement, Oracle Vera matching her pace. As they descended the cliff path, Dakota could hear the sounds of her pack, laughter from the communal dining hall, the ring of hammers from the construction site where they were building new housing, voices raised in song from the vision hall where the evening meditation was taking place. These were her people now. The forgotten, the rejected, the ones who had been told they weren't good enough. And she would protect them with every ounce of power her bloodline had given her. They passed through the settlement center, where a bronze plaque had been mounted on a stone pillar. Dakota paused to read the inscription she'd commissioned. Here stands sanctuary for those the world discarded. Your worth is not determined by those who failed to see it. Your power is not diminished by those who feared it. Your future is not defined by those who rejected your past. You are home. Still getting emotional over your own words. Oracle Vera teased gently. Every time, Dakota admitted. Because I remember what it felt like to believe I was worthless. If this place can prevent even one seer from feeling that way, it's worth everything. They reached the main hall where the 3 new arrivals were waiting. Dakota could sense their fear, their exhaustion, their desperate hope that this place might actually be what the rumors claimed. She stepped into the hall, her prophetic presence warm and welcoming rather than overwhelming. All 3 seers looked up, their eyes widening as they recognized her, not from having met her before, but from the stories that had spread across the territories. The rejected seer who had challenged an Alpha and won. The lost Starweaver who had returned from extinction. The oracle who had built a sanctuary from nothing. Welcome, Dakota said simply, her voice carrying genuine warmth. You're safe here. You're valued here. And you're home, if you choose to stay. The youngest of the 3, barely 20, with tear-stained cheeks and the haunted look of someone who had seen too much, broke down sobbing. Is it true? She asked between gasps. Is it really true that we don't have to go back? That we can just stay? Dakota crossed the hall and knelt before the young seer, taking her hands gently. It's true. No one here will ever force you to accept a bond you don't want. No one will ever tell you that your visions aren't strong enough or that your bloodline isn't pure enough. You're exactly what we need, exactly as you are. She looked up at the other 2 arrivals. That goes for all of you. The only requirement for joining this pack is that you treat others with the respect and dignity that you wish you'd received. Everything else, your past, your mistakes, your perceived weaknesses, none of that matters here. The escaped servant, a woman in her 30s with scarred wrists from prophetic binding chains, spoke up, her voice trembling. And what do you want in return? There must be something. Power like yours doesn't come without a price. Dakota stood, considering her answer carefully. What I want, she said slowly, is for every seer in these territories to know that rejection isn't the end of their story. That being cast aside doesn't mean you're worthless. That there's a place where you can rebuild your life and discover who you really are, separate from what others tried to make you. She gestured around the hall, where other pack members were going about their evening routines, some preparing dinner, others engaged in quiet conversation, a few practicing minor prophetic exercises. What I want is to prove that a pack built on mutual respect and genuine choice can be stronger than one built on fear and obligation. The 3rd arrival, the one whose bondmate had been killed, finally spoke, her voice raw with grief and rage. And what about justice? What about the alphas who destroy lives without consequences? Dakota's expression hardened, her prophetic energy crackling with controlled power. Justice is exactly what I intend to provide. The council may be slow to enforce their own laws, but I'm not bound by their political calculations. If you're willing to testify about what happened to you, I'll ensure your alpha answers for his crimes. He's powerful, the woman warned. He has allies throughout the council. So do I, Dakota replied. And unlike him, I'm not afraid to use my power to protect the vulnerable instead of exploiting them. She addressed all three newcomers again. But that's a conversation for tomorrow. Tonight, you rest. Oracle Vera will show you to your quarters and get you settled. In the morning, we can discuss your options, whether you want to join the pack permanently, whether you need help with legal matters, whether you just need time to heal before making any decisions. Oracle Vera stepped forward, her ancient presence somehow both intimidating and comforting. Come, children. Let's get you fed and shown to your rooms. Dakota's right, everything else can wait until you've had a chance to recover. As the ancient seer led the three newcomers away, Dakota felt a presence approaching from outside the hall. Her enhanced senses identified him before he entered. Thorne. He stepped through the doorway cautiously, looking distinctly uncomfortable in her territory. This was the first time he'd visited since the trial 3 months ago, and Dakota could sense the nervous energy radiating from him. Alpha Ashwood, she said formally, though she couldn't quite keep the surprise from her voice. This is unexpected. Dakota, he replied, then corrected himself. Alpha Starweaver. I apologize for arriving unannounced. I have something I need to discuss with you. She studied him carefully. He looked different, thinner, with shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and hard personal work. But there was also something clearer in his gaze, something more genuine than the careful political mask he'd always worn before. Walk with me, she said, leading him back outside into the twilight. They walked in silence for several minutes, heading away from the settlement toward the northern ridge where the view opened up across both territories, his lands to the east, hers to the west. Your pack is thriving, Thorne observed finally. I've heard the reports, but seeing it in person is impressive. Thank you, Dakota replied neutrally, waiting for him to get to the real reason for his visit. I've been working with the therapist Oracle Vera recommended, he said abruptly, trying to understand why I've spent my entire life sabotaging anything that might make me genuinely happy. Why I rejected Aurora, why I tried to bind you as a servant, why I've treated connection as a weakness instead of a strength. Dakota remained silent, letting him continue. It's not an excuse, Thorne went on, his voice thick with emotion. Nothing I've learned makes what I did to you, to Aurora, to the others, acceptable. But I'm starting to understand the patterns, the fears that drove those choices. And I'm trying to change. He stopped walking and turned to face her directly. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know the prophecy bond between us might be damaged beyond repair. But I wanted you to know that I'm trying. Not because I expect anything from you, but because you deserved better than what I gave you. And I want to become the kind of person who could actually be worthy of a bond like ours. Dakota studied his face, using her prophetic abilities to sense the truth behind his words. She could feel genuine remorse, painful self-awareness, and a desperate hope that he might somehow earn back what he'd thrown away. I appreciate you telling me this, she said carefully. And I'm glad you're doing the work. But Thorne, you need to understand, I'm not waiting for you. I'm not holding my life in suspension hoping you'll eventually become someone I can trust. His face fell, but he nodded. I understand. However, Dakota continued, the fact that you're genuinely trying to change means something. It means that maybe, someday, we might be able to have a conversation about the bond that doesn't end with me wanting to break your consciousness into pieces. A small, sad smile crossed his face. That's more than I deserve. Probably, Dakota agreed. But I've learned that holding on to rage only poisons the person carrying it. I can acknowledge that you're trying to be better while still maintaining my boundaries and protecting myself. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. They stood together in the fading light, two powerful seers connected by a bond they'd both handled badly, trying to find a path forward that didn't require either of them to compromise who they were becoming. There's something else, Thorne said after a long silence. I've been receiving reports about Alpha Darius Blackthorn from the Eastern Territories, the one who killed his rejected bond's mate to prevent a challenge. I know you've been investigating him. Dakota's prophetic energy sharpened with interest. What about him? I have evidence, Thorne said quietly. Testimony from his own pack members about how he planned the killing, how he deliberately provoked the situation to create a legal excuse for violence. It's enough to bring formal charges through the council. He pulled a data crystal from his pocket and offered it to her. I know I don't have the right to ask for your trust, but I thought, maybe this could be a start. Proof that I'm serious about using my position to support the changes you're making rather than fighting them. Dakota took the crystal, feeling the weight of what he was offering. This wasn't just evidence, it was a political risk. By going after a fellow alpha, Thorne would be making enemies among the very wolves whose approval he'd once craved. Why? She asked simply. Because you were right, Thorne replied. About all of it. The system is broken. Seers deserve better than what we've been giving them. And if I want to be someone worthy of a second chance, I need to prove it through actions, not just words. Dakota nodded slowly, pocketing the crystal. I'll review the evidence. If it's as strong as you say, I'll bring charges myself. The council will have to respond when it comes from a Starweaver. Thank you. Thorne hesitated, then added. And Dakota? I meant what I said. However long it takes, whatever it requires, I'll earn back your trust, even if it takes the rest of my life. We'll see, Dakota replied, the same words she'd given him in the sanctum 3 months ago. But this time, they felt less like a dismissal and more like a genuine possibility. After Thorne left, Dakota returned to the settlement center where Oracle Vera was waiting with her characteristic knowing smile. An interesting development, the ancient seer observed. He's trying, Dakota acknowledged. Whether that's enough remains to be seen. And in the meantime, we continue building. We continue offering sanctuary to those who need it. We continue proving that there's another way to structure Seer society, one based on choice and respect rather than power and fear. She looked out over her pack's territory, at the lights beginning to glow in windows as evening settled in, at the seers who had found hope and home in the sanctuary she'd created. This is just the beginning, Dakota said softly. There are thousands of rejected seers across the territories who don't know they have options. Thousands of bonds being destroyed by fear and pride. Thousands of lives being wasted because the powerful refuse to see them as valuable. And you're going to change all of that. Oracle Vera's tone was gently teasing. I'm going to try, Dakota replied. One seer at a time, one pack at a time, one legal challenge at a time. The Starweaver bloodline didn't survive genocide just to accept the status quo. My grandmother wanted to change the world through domination. I'm going to change it through liberation. Oracle Vera's smile was proud. Then the future of Seer society is in excellent hands. Dakota stood there as night fully settled over her territory, feeling the weight of her awakened power and the even greater weight of responsibility that came with it. She was Dakota Starweaver, last heir of the Celestial Crown bloodline, alpha of the Borderlands pack. She was powerful beyond imagination, legally recognized, and finally, valued for exactly who she chose to be. And in a world that had tried so hard to destroy her, that might have been the greatest victory of all. She thought of all the rejected seers still out there, still suffering, still believing the lies that they were worthless. She thought of the battles still to come, the political fights, the resistance from those who benefited from the old system. She thought of the prophecy bond still connecting her to Thorne, waiting to see if time and genuine change could transform something broken into something beautiful. But mostly, she thought of the 3 newcomers now sleeping safely in her territory, finally able to rest without fear. She thought of the nearly 200 seers who had found home in her pack. She thought of the future they were building together, imperfect, challenging, but fundamentally hopeful. We've started something, her awakened consciousness whispered. Yes, Dakota agreed silently. And we're not going to stop until every rejected seer knows they have a choice, knows they have value, knows they have a home if they need one. She turned back toward the settlement, toward the life she'd built from the ashes of her rejection, toward the future she was creating for those who came after her. The prophecy bond might or might not be salvageable. The political battles might or might not be winnable. The system might or might not change as quickly as she hoped. But she was no longer the powerless rogue who had stood in the celestial hall accepting a binding as a servant. She was Dakota Starweaver, and she was just getting started.